There's no proof of it. You're right. There is no actual proof. But I did a couple of, a few tests where there was or I thought was a big topic. And I held off talking about it for that day. And I'd listen to all the other guys. Didn't hear anything about it. But it was a big it was a big story, you would have thought. And so I'd get it the next day. And then lo and behold, one or two of the big guys all of a sudden talk about it. I'm thinking, well, okay, I know it's anecdotal. It's all coinkadink, if you will. But I rarely return the favor by talking about something that I heard on these big guy talk shows, except today I heard something that was it was so outlandish and ludicrous that I felt, well, geez, I've got to look into this further. And lo and behold, look, the Great Rush Bow was right on target. And yeah, I'm talking about something from the Rush Limbaugh show. Now, this is a rarity that I'm going to be actually following a story from one of the big guys. Because I like to set my own path, go on my own path in my own direction and talk to you about stuff usually that isn't really being covered by the big guys, at least until I talk about them. And no, the football thing, I just didn't want to talk about. I know everybody else was talking about it. I didn't want to talk about it, but it got to the point where I could not talk about it. But this is something that also needs to be discussed more, and it needs to have a black man, conservative black man, perspective added to it. And it should come from the coolest, most politically incorrect conservative black man. So this is my perspective, and this has to do with a Baltimore preacher out there talking about economic disenfranchisement. That's a very dumb word to use in the political sense. It really, disenfranchisement, as opposed to enfranchisement. This is disenfranchisement, and this preacher, this black preacher, he said economic disenfranchisement left us with but one. Only one. We only had one chain store to burn. Now notice he said left us. I don't know. I think somebody should ask him. Preacher, were you down in the streets rioting and looting and burning at the same time as the masses were? But he says it left us with but one chain store to burn. Now this is what this guy said. He said it's been blown grossly out of proportion. What it really says, too, is how much disenfranchisement taken place. We could only find one store in the neighborhood to destroy, basically, is what the guy is saying. There was only one major chain store that we could find in the neighborhood to destroy. Now, I gotta ask you, I gotta wonder, is CVS going to rebuild? I don't know. Has CVS rebuilt or on their way to rebuilding that store in that neighborhood? Well, no, wouldn't it be something if they don't? Because then blacks, they're probably going to accuse CVS of being racist and redlining. Where else are blacks going to be able to, African Americans are going to be able to get their legal drugs if CVS isn't in the neighborhood? You burned them out, and you looted them out, and they probably don't want to have to deal with that. They're major corporations, so they're able to handle and absorb such a loss a lot easier than a small mom and pop shop. But their whole thing is not to go into risky areas. They want to mitigate their risk like anybody else. So they're probably saying, I don't know, well, maybe we don't reopen the store. So you got to ask, well, if that's the case, then where are all the African Americans going to be able to get, cheap legal drugs if CVS does not reopen? And the whole thing about disenfranchisement, by the way, the priest or the pastor's name is Jamal Bryant, and he's the pastor of an Empowerment Temple Ministries. Now, I don't know anything about Empowerment Temple Industries, but I do know of these independent churches like Empowerment Temple Ministries. And they have at one level or another, they have this black liberation theology platform. Now, some of many of them are not elevated to the level of Jeremiah Wright church that Obama sat in for 20 years. But nonetheless, they talk about, God delivering blacks from this new form of slavery that we're in. Yes, they call welfare and poverty enslavement. And it's rare for them to see something from the outside, come inside the neighborhood. So something from outside the neighborhood coming into the neighborhood. And one of these things that's a glaring show of support for the community is, a company like CVS. Now, granted, they want to make money. They're trying to make a profit. But at the same time, they planted themselves in the heart of this neighborhood, thinking that, they'd be able to make a go of it. Well, boy, were they wrong. But corporations, they're out there trying to make a buck and employ people who are trying to make a buck. And, tearing down the store or burning down the store put people in the neighborhood that were hired from the neighborhood out of work. But you don't hear them you don't hear people like Jamal Bryant, pastor of Empowerment Temple Ministries, talking about the lost jobs down there in Baltimore. You don't hear him or anybody talk about the lost black-owned businesses down there in Baltimore. You don't hear Pastor Jamal Bryant of Empowerment Temple Ministries or people like him of other churches down there talking about the lost black jobs from black business owners in that area because of the riots. No. All he's concerned about is the disenfranchisement because CVS was the only major national chain or franchise to be in the Baltimore area that these riots took place. This is back in the good old days, 1968, 1992. Why we were able to inflict hundreds of millions of dollars in damage, but now we're pickers because in Baltimore there's only one CVS store. 25 million, that's chump change, and he's blaming it on the economy. So the economy is bad because of who? What? Obama's policies. So that's the other thing that isn't being properly talked about and reported on. Understand, if these people in these cities, if my fellow citizen with lots of melanin in their skin, my brown brothers and sisters here in America, if they feel that they are disenfranchised, you got to ask, well, because of economic conditions, you got to ask, well, whose economy is this? This isn't George Bush's economy. We're over 6 years into Obama's administration. It cannot be George Bush's problem anymore. He cannot be. Look, we had an economy that was probably just as bad, if not worse, going into a new president from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan. But Ronald Reagan was able to turn it around. And even blacks back then rode the wave of success. Not this time, though. Not this time. And you have to ask and wonder, well, why is that? Why not this time? Well, it's due to the fact that we have a president with a certain amount or certain kind of how can we say that? He has a certain kind of a policy, economic policy. And that economic, because people talk about, trickle-down economics doesn't work. Well, it does really work. But we've used things a little bit differently. We've said, triple, and now we're saying trickle up poverty. Now, that's actually a misnomer. Instead of trickle-down success, we have trickle-up poverty. But that's a misnomer because it lets us know what we're talking about so that we all can be on the same page. Even if you're a liberal, you fully understand when somebody says trickle-up poverty. But the real point is, if you actually look at it, it's still trickle-down. See, good things trickle from the top economic rung down to the lower economic rung if good things continue to happen. Now, if bad things continue to happen, if bad things continue to happen at that upper economic group, that is going to also trickle down, probably faster and more harshly at the lower levels than if it were a booming economy. You see, because a wave, an economic wave, does lift all ships. And it lifts all ships, be they big or small. But if you don't want to take your boat out and row or navigate the rough waters after your boat's been risen, well, that's up to you. And then it's not the mechanics or any other person's fault that you can't, work and continue your economic climb. It's not the people below you, and it's not directly the people above you in your economic class, but it's the policies that they're reflecting. Now, if Obama is out there saying, "Well, hey, we need more taxes because the rich can afford to pay more." And they should pay more. It's only fair. Well, when the rich have less money to spend, what happens? Well, they have less money to spend, which means all the people that work in businesses that cater or offer a product or service to the rich don't need as many people. They don't. So people get laid off. Plain and simple. That's a trickle down type of thing. If a business, because a poor person doesn't have a job to offer anybody else, they're not going to fire anybody else. But a financially wealthy person could, and he could look down and say, "Well, you attacked you attacked me by attacking my economic class, and by raising my taxes or changing certain policies." Which means we can't do what we used to do. We can't buy what we used to buy. We can't invest in what we used to invest in. We cannot have as many employees as we had. So, we're going to let people go. We're going to stop this program, stop that program. We're not going to allow people to take pictures of our feet or anything like that. I'm just speaking barefoot and people on the beach or something like that. But it isn't the fault of the general public outside of your community, Mr. Bryant, that is at fault here. To some degree, it's your fault and people within your economic community's fault for even attempting to try to justify this whole looting and burning thing and destruction. And you're saying it yourself. Well, there was only one national brand or national company in the neighborhood that we could find that we could destroy and burn. So as a pastor, are you happy and proud of the fact that people burned a store like that? I mean, really, is that something that you want to be proud of that people do? I don't want to be known or proud of stuff like that. That's not right. Why would anybody do that? I mean, it is what it is, folks.